Well, it's good to be back, and I'm getting accustomed to being back. And wherever I am, God is. I'm still with the song because I just love that. When we really know that, then we live in a place of assurance. We live in a place of trust. We live in a place of deep faith. And so that's always for me the most important thing to cultivate in my soul is the awareness that God is my life. Wherever I am, God is, that I can't escape the presence of God. Impossible to escape it. It's always present, and it's a loving presence. It's a powerful, loving, supportive presence that simply wants the best for each and every one of us. Anyway, so today, this month, we're talking about back to our future. And the topic that came soaring through my uh, through my mind as I was sitting with it was, it's all about vision, baby. It's all about vision. It's all about how we perceive our world. So I'm sure you've been aware, we can't escape the awareness of the remembrance of 9/11 yesterday, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And there were many, many honorings going on. There were many remembrances happening. There were many stories about the heroes and sheroes of that particular day and how they rose up, to support. And there was much remembrance. I heard just a snippet from Kamala Harris and former President Bush about the unity that showed forth then. Do you remember, those of you, I think all of us probably on this Zoom call are old enough to remember that day. And do you remember how there was such a spirit of unity right after 9/11, during 9/11, right after 9/11, we were so unified. People were smiling at people they didn't even know. The differences in faith, the differences in cultures, none of that mattered in that moment because we were in a moment of crisis. We were in a moment where we had to pull together. Our souls told us, see, here's the thing. Unity is our fundamental nature. That's our fundamental nature. That's where we go to when we're in a bit of a challenge. We go to that place of togetherness, of belonging to each other, belonging to life. And so that's what was happening in a beautiful, beautiful way. And then all of a sudden, the unity kind of stopped and we started getting polarized. And it was some newscaster, something that I heard either yesterday or maybe this morning, anyway, saying that the interesting thing is that the minute we started the war with Afghanistan seemed to be the moment that the unity started to dissipate, that feeling. Now, beware, the unity never really dissipates because it's always present. However, in the visible world, it seemed to dissipate. All of a sudden, opinions started happening again. All of a sudden, differences started to be spotlighted again. And so that's interesting to me that we were so together. And then actually, when war was declared, a state of disunity started to happen. I have no opinion about it. I just thought it was interesting. So I've been sitting with this and knowing that that's the challenge and the opportunity of our time, really, is to come back to that fundamental state of unity, that which is our fundamental, our basic nature. It's who we are, it's what we crave, is to be united with each other. And yet we see all these areas of polarization. As we have been pulling out of Afghanistan, we see so many opinions flying around, opinions about the war itself, opinions about how we've gotten out of it, opinions, opinions, opinions. COVID, we see so many opinions and divisions, the vaccinated, the unvaccinated, the masked, the unmasked. I mean, just so much emphasis has been on division. The climate crisis that we're in right now. Again, do you notice how all of these are opportunities for us to come together, to unite, to know truth, to come from the original vibration, the original vision of the divine for our planet, because that's what's going to basically change the world, but we strayed from that. And so all of these areas of division, and I'm not even mentioning right now all of the crime, all of the isms, the sexism, the racism, the homophobia, just all of those ways that we find to emphasize how we're different. you know? The reality is, at our basic soul level, we are the same. At the soul level, we are one. You are me, I am you. It doesn't matter what your gender is to me. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. It doesn't matter, you know, what your culture is. It doesn't matter, you know, what your religion is. We are basically one. That's the truth of it. And that's what's calling us now. We are being called to come back to that place of unity. And those of us who are awake and aware, and more people, by the way, are waking up every moment on the planet because there's such a strong frequency being created by so many people meditating together, by so many people praying together, by so many religions uniting together. You know, even I was just thinking, even you know, in our new thought, it's like, you know, well, there's that part of new thought, and there's that part of new thought, and maybe this part of new thought is better than that part. It's just all of these ways, you know, that we find to separate. And isn't it interesting that we flock to separation so easily? And that's the human condition. We're called, as those of us who know truth, we are called to move beyond those divisions. We are called to come from a place of oneness, to come from a place of inclusivity, because spirit, God, Allah, the field, whatever you want to call this one, you know, the pattern that connects, whatever you want to call it, this one is a unity. This one doesn't know differences. This one simply knows and cherishes and gives to each and every part of its creation, including Mother Earth. So, um, sitting with this and the topic that came forth, and mind you, like Reverend Brown always says too, I never know when the topic comes forth what it's supposed to be about. And then I get to sit with and go, what the heck is this about? You know, part of me said, oh, it's just about visioning, talk about visioning. But that's not just what it's about. That's a small part of it. What it's about is tweaking our perception. Because something that came to me real clearly was, you know, your perception, this is not new to any of you, but your perception creates your world. And our collective perception creates the world as we experience it. So we need to correct our perception. It's not about trying to change anything on the outer, although some of us might be called to work with social change. Um, but it's about really looking at the inner, becoming the world that we want to see, becoming that. So what came to me, and I think I read it somewhere too, is that we are, as human beings, as a divinely human being, I am a bridge between the seen and the unseen. Can you see yourself as a bridge between the visible world and the invisible world? And see, we're called to live in both worlds. And that's a challenge. Our souls have taken on a big challenge because we're called to stand in invisible truth in the midst of all of this that's going on around us. In the midst of all of it, I am called to be in that place of truth, which is beyond my opinions. And certainly opinions do come up, you know, but I'm called to be beyond this, to be able to be inclusive, to be able to love everyone, despite whether they come from a red state, a blue state, despite, you know, whether they're Republican or Democrat, despite their political opinions, despite their ethical opinions, for example. I'm called to love inclusively, you know, the most hardened criminal and the most elevated saint. You know, that's what we're called to. We're called to that. And so then the question is, how do we get to that world that, as Sharif Abdullah says, I love Sharif Abdullah. And if you've ever seen him in person, he's just an awesome, wonderful individual who works in Oregon. He actually works with the homeless up there at this point in time. But he articulates oneness. He articulates that a world that works for everyone is a world in which we know our oneness. We come back to that place of our fundamental unity. So as I'm with this idea that I am a bridge between heaven and earth, so to speak, between the seen and the unseen. And so as a bridge, and interesting when we get the visual of bridge, there's a span that happens. And as this bridge, what I'm called to do is to go deep beyond the span, even to go deep to that place of oneness, to that place of unconditional love. And what came to me as I was preparing was to be in that place of now, of now. And I think that Michael took us to that place in his meditation today very beautifully. Now does not mean the same as the present moment. Let's be real clear about that. When I'm talking about the now, I'm talking about transcending time and space. You see, I can be in the present moment and still be in the consciousness of time and space. When I'm in that place of now, time and space are not a consideration for me. And we get to that place of now, because you might say, well, how do I get there? How do I live from there? That's a constant question for me too. I want to be there all the time. And I was noticing this week, by the way, how so often I slipped out of that space because I've been back. And since I've been back, most of you know my place was flooded. And so now my belongings are back, but they aren't put away yet. So I've been in the midst of that. I've been in the midst of refinancing. I've been in the midst of taking care of some other personal things, some family things. I've been in the midst of getting what's the word I want? Anyway, back at Agape again and all that, preparing for practitioner. All of this is going on. And there's a part of me, and I think you can all relate to this, there's a part of me that kind of gets pulled by time. That goes, oh my God, how is all of this going to happen? And then I just have to remember, and this is our work here, to be in the now. I just have to remember to go back to continually practice that meditative awareness of the divine. And when I'm in that awareness that Michael took us to beautifully, that visioning takes us to beautifully, when I'm in that awareness, time and space disintegrate. They don't matter anymore. And in fact, and I'm sure some of you might have had this experience where you might be, and you could be in meditation. It doesn't necessarily mean that, doesn't need to be meditation, however, where it just seems like the moment expanded. Have you ever driven somewhere and you're thinking, okay, I got to be there at a certain time. Here's the traffic. Don't know how that's going to happen. And somehow you transcend that moment and you get there. Have you had that experience? Greg Braden talks about it in one of his books. I think it's the Isaiah Effect, where he talks about they were on a trip to Egypt and they were in a bus and they were supposed to be at this particular place. I don't know if it was a pyramid or what, but it was a scheduled tour. They were supposed to be there at a certain time. And there were so many complications that were happening with the bus, with the traffic on the road, I think there was a flock of animals that stopped them. They were going, crossing. And what he told the folks was, okay, we just have to be in the consciousness that we're already there. Be in that consciousness that beyond time, beyond space, that this is not impossible. And so, they continued driving and very slowly. And lo and behold, they arrived on time. Now, you can't explain that in human terms. It's impossible to explain. However, do you see how time and space collapsed in that moment? And that's what happens when we're in that now moment. Time and space collapses. When we go into prayer, for example, what I love to do when I go into prayer is just get into that space that is beyond space, get into that moment that is the now, and to let the prayer emerge from that place. And I hear so many of our practitioners praying from that place, and it's so beautiful. And then there are the prayers when sometimes we don't get to that place. I have those prayers myself, where I'm kind of pulled by something and I can't quite get there. And I do the prayer and it's fine. It's a fine prayer. However, there's a different sense of it, and I personally think it's not quite as powerful because Well, this is a whole other talk that I'll talk about sometime. But it's coming from a place of secondary causation instead of primary. When I talk about primary causation, I talk about going to that place of the original vibration of spirit. That's where we go when we go into that now space. I go into the space where all that there is the divine. That's all that there is the divine. All that there is that original vibration of spirit that speaks its word, and the word happens. When we pray from that place, it's powerful. When we speak from that place, it's powerful. When we act from that space, it's powerful. And it's totally different. When I'm in that space, I don't care about outcomes. When I'm in that space, it doesn't matter what's going on in the world around me. Now, that don't take me wrong about this. It's not that I, Joan, don't care about the world. What it is that the truth is when we are in that place of now, when we're in tune with that divine self, that original vibration, the living word, the field of infinite possibilities, whatever we call it, when we are abiding in that place, it's magical, it's creative, something happens, you know? We don't even have to do a formal visioning, although visioning really helps us to get there, because the first two steps of visioning is coming into oneness and coming into the field of unconditional love. But see, in this now place, it's literally a field of infinite possibilities. Everything is done in that field. And we're in that space, we catch that. We feel it, we sense it. And some of you might be thinking, good Lord, how can I ever do that or be that? I ask myself that sometimes, because sometimes, as I said, it's easier to be in that space than other times. But here's the thing, when I'm in that space, there's only unity, there's only oneness, there's no separation. The war in Afghanistan or whatever's happening with all of that, just isn't, it's not happening. I am in the space of the infinite where all things are possible and where my word is creative, where my intention is creative, where my very beingness is creative. You catch what I'm saying? That's what we're called to now. We're called to being in that place. And here's the thing, when we are in that place of vision, whether it's a formal visioning, whether it's simply meditating in that space, whether it's having that moment, athletes have that moment on the field, oftentimes where time and space disintegrate and there's just that perfect play that's happening. What was I going to say now? I lost my thought. So when we're in that space, all possibilities are present and we get to choose from that space. But here's the thing that I notice. When I'm in that space, my conscious mind isn't even aware of choosing. It's my divine self that's just knowing what needs to happen here, that's knowing what needs to take place here. And here's the thing. When I am in that place, all differences are transcended. Now, I want to give you an example of how this has happened in the material realm. I was talking to my prayer partner last night, and I was looking for, I was like, oh my God, what's a story or an example? And she reminded me of a time that she was the senior minister at the Dayton Church of Religious Science back in Ohio. And it was 9/11. That's where she was at 9/11. And the ministers, all of the leaders of the various faith traditions were asked to come forth with a collective statement. And so she was part of that, an interfaith group. She was a very active part of an interfaith group there. It included Muslims, it included Jewish people, it included Catholics, it included Protestants, it included Hindus, it included all the various spiritual and religious traditions. So she suggested that all of these leaders came together. And it's like, how are we ever going to come with one purpose statement from all these different faith traditions? And so she suggested visioning. And she did a visioning with them. And she said in less than 2 hours, they came forth with a beautiful statement that they then provided to the city. That was then, they did some kind of TV coverage of it. But do you hear what I'm saying? See, they went to a place of vision and it transcended all of their differences. You hear what I'm saying? There were no separate religions in that visioning. There was only the oneness. And what came forth was the divine idea for what wanted to be said at that time, in that place, in that particular city. And so when we come from that place of vision, and that's one of our spiritual practices here at Agape, is visioning. And it's not just for when we want to make something happen. In fact, that's not what visioning is all about. Visioning is about each one of us being willing to be the avenue through which a divine idea comes forth. In this case, as I'm talking today, the avenue through which world peace comes forth, the avenue through which a world that works for everyone comes forth. You see, again, we are the bridge. We need to become the very frequency that we're looking for in the world. We are not going to create a world that works for everyone if we come from a place of hatred, if we come from a place of anger, if we come, now there may be moments of anger. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. However, the anger can be used to get us moving, you know. However, we don't want to stay in that place. We don't want to act from that place. We want to act from the consciousness of pure, unconditional love. That's where we want to act from. That's it. Agape means the unconditional love of God operating in the human heart. That's our primary quality at Agape. That unconditional love that is all inclusive. You know, we've had moments when we first began to Zoom, and one of the reasons that we don't open the chat room is because individuals would go into the chat room and create a little bit of havoc. You know, they would actually write down the N-word. They would put racial slurs. They would. Now, here's the thing. You know, do we approve and condone that behavior? No, absolutely not. However, I can't afford to hate those people. Do you know what I'm saying? That when I hate those people, that simply continues that vibration of hate. And instead, what I'm called to do is to love and forgive. And remember, forgiveness does not mean condoning. Remember that. Because, you know, I do not condone any kind of racial slurs, any kind of violence. I don't condone any of that. And I cannot afford to be unforgiving. I cannot afford to close my heart off. That's a piece of work. You know, oftentimes when I'm watching the news and hear all this political stuff, you know, there's such a temptation to want to, you know, be very opinionated, and to you know, not, what's the word I want to use? Not hate the individuals, but certainly not love them. Let's put it that way. And I'm called to love. We're called to be lovers, you know, and not dysfunctional lovers, you know, not dysfunctional. We aren't going to allow ourselves to be walked upon as a human society. We're going to take our stand, and we're going to come from a place of vision. Go into that place of the original vibration. Go into that place that is beyond duality, that is beyond differences. And then what happens is we are flooded with the awareness of the divine idea for our planet, the divine idea for each of our lives. It's, you know, our time is now. This is what we've come here for. I know that each of us on this call has, in this service, each of us has been doing our personal work for a long, long time. We've been doing our spiritual work, our personal work, our growth work, our psychological work. We've all been doing that work on ourselves. Now is our time to collectively come together and be the consciousness of a world that works for everyone, to be that. And then we see that. You know, it starts to happen in the world, and we'll get called to act in the way that we'll get called to. You know, I'm looking at Jerry De La Rosa now, who has a ministry in Kenya, you know, that we're actually going to get to support later in the year, you know, providing new thought books, you know, to individuals there. I'm looking at Kathy Buys and Irvin Verona, who, you know, are the vision of a diversity ministry has been coming forth. You know, there are ways that different ones of us are called. You see, what's your calling? What are you called to do? And the way to discover that is to go into that field. You don't want to come from a place of reactivity. You want to come from a place of responding to the divine call. How am I being called? Simply go into a meditative space, do your best to be in the now moment. Sometimes we get there, sometimes we don't. But just my intention is to be there all the time, to be there when I'm speaking, to be there when I'm meditating, to be there when I'm talking and acting. And am I there all the time? No. However, more and more and more of the time, you see. So be in that space as best you can. Go into that space and ask, what is the divine idea for my participation in the healing consciousness of the world at this time? You see, how am I to be that bridge? How am I to be that frequency? I can only see what I perceive, you see. That's the only thing I can do. And so that's the word today. Know that within you and within us collectively is a creative genius. You are a creative genius. We are made to be creators. The creator of all life created us in its own spiritual image and likeness, meaning that creativity is one of the qualities of our life. How am I to be creative? How am I to participate in a world that works for everyone? We're all called in different ways. Some people are called, lots of times I hear people say, oh, you don't want to just be a monastery out in a monastery somewhere. You're not making any difference. Not true. Some people are called to simply pray all the time. That's powerful. Some people are called to act in certain ways. So what's your calling? What are you here for? You know, and then be willing to be it. The more you embody what you're here for, the more that you will find yourself taking on that quality. I guarantee that. I guarantee that you will end up being that frequency that literally heals the planet. And what we mean by healing is not fixing or changing anything. It means revealing the underlying truth that's always there. There's an underlying unity, an underlying love, an underlying compassion, an underlying justice that wants to emerge, and it needs us. You ever thought about that? It needs you. It needs you. And so I ask you, be in the stillness. Ask yourself, what's the divine idea? What's the vision? What's mine to be and to do? And then have the courage to take the steps. That's what it's about. I know one of my ways is by speaking, by just simply, and do I always feel like doing it? No, honestly, I don't. And I get here and something happens, you see, something happens. Yesterday, I was sitting in my living room and I was, with all these boxes around me, and I was like, God dang, I really want to be putting that stuff away rather than working with this talk. And so you just do the work even when you don't feel like it. That's the point I'm making. You do it even when you don't feel like it. And then the universe supports you. And going back to our yearly theme, you soar, you're carried, you soar, because life supports you always. You are always supported, always loved, always given everything you need. So no excuses here. You're not too old, you're not too young, you're not too uneducated. You're not the wrong ethnic group. You're not the wrong gender. You're not the wrong sexual orientation. You aren't, you aren't the wrong political party. Whatever it is, whatever comes up in you that wants to say, I can't do this, just say, that's not true. I'm a divine being. I'm the very presence of God. I'm here to transform the world. We are here to do that. And when we come together on Sunday, our intention is to create this vortex from which a new world emerges.